Hello and welcome to episode 121 of Linux Dev Time. I'm Joe.
I'm Amolith.
I'm Kevin.
And I'm Andy.
Good to talk to you all again. I keep hearing this meme, vibe coding, and I want to know more about it. I think I accidentally did some of this recently. Amolith, you're young, tell us about it.
It is prompting an LLM to produce code and then running that code and debugging that code and editing that code based on vibes. Whatever output it produces, you run it. If there's an error, you copy paste that error into the LLM, say there was an error with that code you gave me. Fix it. Whatever it produces the next time, you run that. No code review, nothing.
So coding for idiots then is what you're telling me.
It can have good results for very low stakes, small projects that are like one file. But I've tried vibe coding with various different tools, and I've had a huge failure and pretty okay success in different contexts.
I can't even really fathom trying vibe coding outside of like a joke. I mean, not to say like LLMs are terrible. I mean, whatever. People have different opinions, but it very rarely produces the exact output I'm looking for, and I have a really good idea of what I'm looking for. I can't fathom just like give me whatever and then running that on my machine willy-nilly.
I mean, presumably it involves quite a lot of just not caring what you get, so long as it appears to do what you hoped it would do.
I mean, are you like not connected to the internet when you do this too?
You shouldn't.
This just seems like rife with some kind of error.
Well, let me tell you about my recent accidental vibe coding.
And how is it an accident?
Yeah.
Well, because I didn't know what vibe coding was when I did it.
Oh.
You mean you independently invented vibe coding?
Yeah.
Have you been hanging out with the wrong crowd again?
Seemingly so.
You heard it here first. Joe did vibe coding before it was cool.
Yeah, obviously. So I was wondering if ChatGPT could actually produce code that worked if I have no idea what that code is. And so I've been thinking of trying this for a while, but I just couldn't come up with a problem that I needed to solve. And then I started to get annoyed by YouTube videos showing annotations and having to toggle it off for every single video. And mostly I'm bothered by the logo in the bottom right-hand corner that just I feel is burning into my screen when I'm watching the news or whoever's YouTube channel. And so I just instinctively turn it off. And I just thought, there must be an extension for Firefox that will do this. And I had a very quick look and couldn't find anything maintained. Amolith, I've got a feeling you're going to tell me that there is one. But I thought, right, that seems like a relatively straightforward project. So I'm going to have ChatGPT do that for me. And so I explained the problem. Well, not really, actually. I just said, please write the code for a Firefox extension that will automatically turn off annotations on YouTube videos. And so confidently, it spat out some CSS and a manifest JSON file and some JavaScript and told me how to do it as well. Go to about debugging and blah, 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 and load a temporary add-on. I thought, what could go wrong in my browser? So I just YOLO'd it. I just went on vibes. And obviously it didn't work. Just didn't work at all.
Okay, but it didn't take over your machine and send all your passwords to Microsoft?
That you know of.
Hopefully not. And so I said to it, well, this didn't work. Having loaded the extension, if I play a YouTube video, it shows annotations as normal. When I try to refresh the page, it gives me the following error. This page isn't redirecting properly. And it said, oh, yeah, well, I did it wrong. Try this instead. And didn't work. You could then refresh the page, but it still showed annotations. So it said, all right, yeah, try this instead. And then it was just weird. Like it was just constantly toggling on and off, like just flashing, like strobing the annotations button. So I told it looks like that was happening. It said, oh, right, no, yeah, of course, try this. And then it just did that, but a little bit more slowly.
I've worked with software engineers who are a bit like this.
Yeah. And so then it told me to do the same thing as it had initially told me with the redirecting thing that just broke. And I said, this doesn't work. We're back to not being able to refresh the page. Oh, you're right, it says. Oh, of course, I shouldn't have done that. Final fix, it says, and gave me some more code and told me why this fix works. And it kind of worked. I couldn't see the annotations, but they were still on. It had basically just hidden them with CSS. And I pasted that code into our private chat for you lot to have a look at. So we could talk about that in a second. But then I said to it, well, I can't see the annotations, but the toggle is still on. It said, oh, right, yeah. 1 second. And then gave me this new code. I loaded that. And then I heard my fan go to max and like quickly to the top. And it was like, something is pegging the CPU. And I'm like, right. And then just had to like kill stuff. And I'm like, well, I suppose that's all my passwords gone then.
Now your account is banned by Google.
Yeah. So that was the end of that. So we almost got there. And I don't know. So having had a quick look at the code from the one before it hacked my computer to shreds, what do you think of the code it produced?
Well, we had a look, and none of us are like Firefox extension developers, but it looked plausible to me. It didn't contain any glaring errors that I could see.
No crypto miners, nothing like that.
Nothing like that I could see.
Yeah, and one of the things that we were mentioning was that it being JavaScript, which is kind of like a loose language, like there's a lot of things that can go, and you can be very loose with the language. That's the best way you can say it. It uses some of those features here, which kind of make the code a little bit more scary to run, especially if you don't know what it does. Now, this pretty obviously doesn't do anything super crazy, but the fact that it uses some of those like weirder language features and JavaScript just kind of accepts it and says, yeah, sure, that's fine. That's what makes vibe coding a little bit scary to me. Because at least with, some different languages that have stronger compilers, you would hope that they would reject the compiler itself, or maybe even an interpreter would reject the code right away and be like, hey, this doesn't look right, or this isn't exactly right. And it would stop you before you get to that execution phase.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that it does that might be slightly unusual, it's probably idiomatic for this type of code, I'm not sure, but it uses a function that's immediately called. And the thing about that is that it's a relatively advanced feature, which would probably be fine if someone who knows what they're doing and was writing an extension would probably do this. But if you're a beginner trying to learn what's going on, it's quite confusing. So I think sometimes there's a mismatch between the code that an AI is generating. If you want to be a beginner understanding stuff based on it, it's probably not a good place to start from that point of view.
Yeah, it's almost like an anonymous function or a callback or something that produces another function. It's kind of strange.
It may very well be idiomatic for these things because, quite often you do weird stuff like that in JavaScript just to encapsulate things.
But now that I think about it too, vibe coding actually doesn't sound too different from like your standard client consultant deal. Just, I guess that's in the analog.
Certainly, if you told me that story about a contractor, like an outsourced contractor, I would have absolutely believed that story completely.
Well, the confidence with which it told me that each time it was definitely going to work.
Yeah, that is the disturbing thing.
LLMs are fundamentally bullshit machines. They were trained from the start, from the ground up, to mimic human speech patterns. And that could be like written language, verbal language, in the case of like text-to-speech models, for example. But they're anthropoglossic systems, and that means they mimic human speech. And they're trained to always have an answer. Just period. They should always answer the user with something.
Even if it's bullshit.
Yes, yeah. Sometimes especially if it's bullshit.
Yeah, it doesn't matter either way to it.
Right.
Like, my question is, why does it always sound so confident? Like, surely it's trained on some text that is not confident? I don't know.
I guess somewhere in the reinforcement learning loop, somewhere in the training loop, some system optimizes the output of the LLM towards confidence.
And maybe not just confidence, but also like conversational style, right? If
yes,
Amolith, you and I were going back and forth, it would be very natural if you got something wrong to be like, oh, I'm sorry, yeah, here's another take at it. So I think that's probably just based off the training sets or the weights that they use. That's how these conversations tend to come out.
We also shouldn't forget quite how many humans there are in the loop in the training process, right? There's armies of people who are rating answers for how good they are. And quite often those people won't necessarily know whether the answers are right, but they might well be rating them for how confident they seem because that they're likely to think they're right if they sound confident. So it could be that. I
had an experience that mimicked Joe's to an extent. I'm not a web developer, and I wanted to take an SVG of some sort of font or something. I can't remember what it was. And I wanted it to, with an SVG, write out like a word. Let's just say Kevin. And if you say, hey, generate me an SVG that says the word Kevin, it'll say, here you go. But if you display that SVG, it will very clearly not be the word Kevin. It won't even be legible text. It'll probably be a line. Who knows what it'll be?
Some shapes.
But the same sort of thing. You can say, well, this doesn't work. And they're like, oh, I'm sorry. Here, try this again. And it'll never get to the point of saying the word Kevin or whatever it was you wanted it to say. So like there's this very strange characteristic that I think is probably just shared by a bunch of different models that have this sort of propensity to spit out some bullshit and also be very confident in it, but very conversational about like, oh, here is the real fix. And it's not I don't think it's actually taking context from the last ones. It's just making changes and tweaks. And the LLM itself is vibing. I think that's what's happening.
Okay, this episode is sponsored by people who support us with PayPal and Patreon. Go to linuxdevtime.com/support for details of how you can support us too. Patreon supporters have the option to listen to episodes without ads like this. And it's not just this show. There's Late Night Linux for news, discoveries, audience input, and misanthropy, 2.5 admins about system administration, Linux Matters for upbeat, family-friendly adventures, Linux After Dark for silly challenges and philosophical debates, Hybrid Cloud Show for everything private and public cloud, and Ask the Hosts for off-topic questions from you. You can even get some episodes a bit early. We've got a lot going on, and it's only possible because of the people who support us. So if you like what we do and can afford it, it would be great if you could support us too at linuxdevtime.com/support.
I feel really divided about this whole thing because I have really good memories of times when businesses built their own little applications to do jobs that they needed doing, and they got a software engineer to do that, right, in Microsoft Access, or maybe someone who wasn't a software engineer. So I think it would be absolutely great if people could write programs that they needed to do the jobs that they had doing easily. That would be awesome. I would love that to be possible. But number one, I don't think it is possible at the moment. And number two, the whole LLM business is based on like an environmentally disastrous set of systems that are using loads of people's copyrighted material without permission, sort of burning the world down and a part of some weird ultra-capitalist system that's destroying our whole society. So I think that, you can't have that.
Well, yeah, that's the point that I always come to. These things are useful or can be useful, but at what cost? And I just don't think the cost is worth it. For the half-assed code that it took me so many attempts to get something even vaguely working and then something that almost destroyed my machine. At what cost? I feel bad for all those queries because the training aside, even querying ChatGPT uses a shitload of energy and water and all the rest of it. And so I feel bad, even admitting that I did this.
So defend it, Amolith.
I haven't seen anything yet, and it might just be me not looking or not noticing. Definitely could be that. I haven't noticed anything that makes me think chatting with an LLM or running completions and that kind of stuff is as environmentally disastrous as some say. I could be wrong. I like to think I'm actively looking out for stuff that proves me wrong, but I don't know that I am. I don't think anyone can argue that training them was just blatantly unethical and probably blatantly illegal in most of the world. I think we should stop training them. No more training, no more fine-tuning, none of that extra stuff until we can figure out how to do it sustainably in a way that respects copyright, that preserves attribution in software or content that requires attribution.
So when we find a unicorn then?
And let's not forget about respecting the rights and paying a decent wage to all the people involved in the training process as well.
Yes. You mentioned earlier that humans participate in the training process. Oftentimes, they're in third world countries and they're grossly underpaid. And some of the text they have to read is extremely disturbing because these LLMs just produce who knows what until they get trained. And they've been trained on the whole internet. The internet contains some absolutely disgusting stuff. Someone has to be in the loop to tell them not to produce that disgusting stuff.
Not just text, also images.
Especially images, too. So all of that is horrible. I think the way they're trained is horrible and it should stop. But the ones that exist do have use. I've used a couple of products from Codium. I've used SuperMaven, Copilot, a bunch of stuff in Zed, Claude Code, Block's Goose product, and I think the other one is called Aider. I've used Aider most. They do, in my experience, have good results. I've implemented multiple features in a Kotlin Android app, just saying, I need this thing done. Here's the context of this particular file. Here's some more context from this other file. I want you to use this library. Here's the documentation for that library. And the output it comes up, given all of that high quality, highly relevant context, in my experience, has been generally good. But trying to start something from scratch, on the other hand, has been terrible. In Windsurf, I tried to prompt Codium's suite of whatever to write a Lambda for me in AWS. That had disastrous results. I spent maybe 2 weeks trying to debug the horrific ball of Python it produced.
Wow.
And then I gave up, rewrote it myself in a couple days.
But yeah, like I said, I wish this thing existed. I wish it was not just this ethical nightmare and that it was actually effective. Like if either of those things were true, it wouldn't be quite so bad.
Well, I think the weird part is like it does produce some good, right? I would say subjectively, but there are cases like Amolith just mentioned where it does produce some good output. I think there are some good outcomes. I think we can advance society in some respects with this. That's with some loose air quotes there. There is some potential good here that could happen. Now, I think we would all on this show agree that the like unethical nature of the training and environmental aspect, like we would all agree, like those are horrible. But in order to make like progress with the conversation, I think also like there is some good that could come out of it. We could have a world where the LLM is the one that's having to take on the horrendous, disastrous stuff of the, moderation tasks that people are having to take on right now. Like there is some good that can come out of it. There is little coding tasks right now that it can do. It can generate tests. It can do little bits of code. But the big difference with those, and I think some of the difference with where either Amolith or myself have had some success with some LLMs, is in that both of us presumably are competent developers that can double check what's coming out of it and take the time to do that and not just throw it out on vibes, I guess.
Well, that's the terrifying thing, right? Someone who's a complete chancer could potentially blag their way into a development job just using LLMs and just do it all on vibe coding. And like, where does that end? That's just a horrible situation.
We've actually had to stop doing asynchronous code tasks for interviews where I work exactly because of that. Because now you hand somebody a task, you ask them to come back with an answer a few hours or a few days later, and 9 times out of 10, it's just going to be some LLM generated thing that they would then even have a hard time talking through.
Yeah, like the code for my Firefox extension, I haven't got a clue what it does. I couldn't tell you a single thing about it. I can copy paste it to you and show you it, but that's it. I can run it, I can show you it, but I have no idea what it does.
But also, here's what's funny. Like, let's just say it was for some sort of like an interview process or a job. You could take what it output and then use that as your like scoping to figure out what just the, what do these functions do? What does this do? And then you could come back to an interview and actually talk about this specific function, probably pretty detailed, even though you by your own admission, be like, I'm not a JavaScript developer at all.
Well, I've heard from people that I know who have interviewed candidates for jobs, and they are quite clearly stalling while they copy-paste stuff into and out of ChatGPT and similar LLMs. And if you're good enough at filling time, then you could probably get away with it. And so this is just, I don't know, like this started out funny, this conversation, but it's just taking a dark turn as far as I'm concerned. I think that vibe coding is a terrible idea and no one should do it, even for fun. If you insist on using LLMs to like help you with a bit of boilerplate or brainstorm some stuff or whatever, or even do little bits that you actually understand what it's outputting, then fine. I don't think that it's worth the environmental costs and ethical costs and all the rest of it. But for fuck's sake, don't do vibe coding at all. Like this should not be anything more than a meme.
Where I've had the most success has been where I have known more about the domain than the LLM, and I can immediately spot its bullshit. Where I've had the most failure is in vibe coding. I am intentionally not reviewing what it produces. I don't understand it, so I can't direct it to improve what it output.
I feel like I have to insert here, like declaring an interest, which is that I love coding and I have a great job coding. And if something came along to replace me, that would be extremely distressing for me. So I have like a vested interest in this stuff not working or not being allowable for some other reason. So I have to say that.
I think there's maybe one example where, again, if we take, the ethical and environmental concerns out of it for just a second, I think there's maybe one area where I would say like vibe coding could be, I won't say beneficial. As close to that as you can get without saying beneficial. But if it's someone getting into programming, they want to get into programming, they have no idea where to start, or they have a very limited idea of where to start, and this just gets them into the subject, lets them get some code out so they can see it, lets them see some progress on a project, I would support that. Now, I wouldn't support that for more than like whatever the introduction tutorial is, but I think that's an area where getting more people into coding, especially people that may not have had the opportunity before, I would call that a benefit. Now, is it a net benefit with all the other costs? That's TBD.
I think there would have to be many guardrails around an experience like that, because LLMs suck with new languages or new frameworks, or maybe old languages or frameworks that just aren't on the internet very much. So the LLM could just as easily set them on the wrong path.
But let's assume like maybe the old hacker, mindset of I'm going to figure it out. It's going to spit out some garbage, but now I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to dig into this and, figure out what's going on and make it work. I would support that as like kind of a starter project or whatever. But yes, that is a very like kind of niche example. And I totally agree. It could take you off on the wrong path. It could do something that's actually harmful as well. So yeah, I think that's something to be wary of as in addition.
It really sounds good in theory, but when the LLM's producing sometimes quite complicated code that is also full of subtle bugs, then it doesn't feel like it's a great place to start. I'd rather start with, say, a programming environment that makes things simple, or a tutorial that someone's written that guides you through stuff or something like that.
Well, one of the areas that I've had some success with the more conversational style LLMs is to have it re-explain a particular concept that I'm either learning or don't remember particularly. Because sometimes just hearing something from a different way or a different angle does help someone understand it. And I think having a different way to say things could be beneficial.
I've barely used any of these things, but the one quite positive experience I had with ChatGPT was I asked it to kind of explain a concept, or say, what would you do in this scenario? And it explained it quite clearly. And because I already knew what it was talking about largely, I was able to check that it was correct. So it was quite good for explaining stuff, which is, of course, like a words task, which is what they are primarily for, right?
Yeah, I've had it explain things like different parts of man pages or, particular aspect of a socket API. And with those like very limited things, it is good at kind of explaining those parts. And it's also something that's very easy to double check and be like, did this come out correctly or not? And can sometimes point me in the right direction. So
stop defending this bullshit. Quite frankly, I've had enough.
No vibe coding.
For example, I've just showed you the code that seemingly crashed my machine. Please tell me what's wrong with this code.
Okay, so I might be wrong. I just had a really quick look at it, but it looks to me like when it starts up, it runs its main function. Inside that function, it says whenever anything changes, run this function, which is the same function again. So every time anything changes, it adds another thing listening for anything changing, and another thing and another thing and another thing.
So it wrote me a fucking fork bomb is what you're telling me.
Yeah.
Great. 10 out of 10 ChatGPT would vibe code again. Right, well, on that irritated note, we should probably get out of here then. We'll be back in a couple of weeks, but until then, I've been Joe.
I've been Amolith.
I've been Kevin.
And I've been really sorry, Joe, and I'm Andy.
See you later.